Okay, good morning, everybody say. This is the last week of here for the summer. We'll continue with Shem afterwards. We'll see Elul again. I want to talk today about Gorel, and in particular Gorel Hagra. Now, of all the ways to be able to tell what's going to happen in the future and predict things, probably the most litvish of them is Gorel Hagra. And all the stories of Gorel Hagra about Litvish Sheshivas, Litvish Gedalim, there's a ton of stories. I'm not going to say 20 stories today of every different, what do you say? Yeah, exactly. No, whatever everyone's favorite story is. I'm not going to say each person's particular favorite story. But let's just say of all the ways, it's the most Litvish way. Lamaisa, just before we launch into it, and I want to say over one very famous story, but that's I think the flagship story of Gorel Hagra. I do need to say one note of caution. Although the Gorel is referred to as Gorel Hagra, which sounds like the Goyin, if I'd say Gorel Hagra, I think the assumption would be the Goyin for sure made it up. If he didn't, he probably used it a few times, probably a few stories, maybe in one or two of his Svarim. L'maisa, not in any of the Goyin Svarim or in the Svarim of his Talmidim, like from the earlier days. Are there any even whispers of Gorel Hagra? Not the mechanics of how to do it, not any stories of them doing it, none of that. So it's a Gorel Hagra. It became referred to as the Gorel Hagra, I don't know, a little later down the line. It became very popular probably around World War I, like in the early 1900s. You could find a story here and there of a Gorel being done earlier that will sound similar to the Gorel Hagra. Not exactly the mechanics of a Gorel Hagra, but similar. But like the real prevalence of Gorel Hagra becoming like a popular mechanism of Gorel is like around World War I when the whole Kehillah was in upheaval and everybody was moving and they weren't sure should they go here, go there. It was dangerous in every direction. That's when like Gorel Hagra became very popular. Now, there is one very famous story. I want to start with that one because that's like the most well-documented story of Gorel Hagra. And then we'll go into a little bit the sugya of Gorel. So, in 1948, during the War of Independence in Israel, there was a platoon of soldiers, 35 of them, who went to defend Gush Etzion. It's nearest to Yerushalayim. And they were attacked by a large group of Arab soldiers. Hundreds, maybe thousands, and every single one of them was killed. Now, the area where their bodies lay was very unsafe to reach them. It was very hard to reach them because it was the middle of a war zone. And over the next, day or two, while the battle was still raging, the Arab soldiers made a second pass, in this ridge on near Gush Etzion, and they destroyed the bodies more or less. They looked them, whatever they did, they destroyed the bodies more or less. So that when the bodies were finally collected a few days later, it was very, very hard to be able to ascertain exactly which body belonged to which soldier. They knew which 35 names had gone to that pass, but exactly who was almost impossible to know. They took the bodies back. They made a levaya for them. They did some sort of field identification where they would try to find an article of clothing or something to figure it out, and they held that they figured out who 23 of the bodies were. And they buried them in a kever achim, one big burial ground, and they marked who 23 of them are, but they didn't mark the other, my math is not great, the other 12. The other 12, they didn't mark who they were, and they were left, this kever achim was set up over there. Now, in 1950, once the war was fully done, the chief rabbi, he wasn't the chief rabbi yet, but Rabbi Gorin was tasked with trying to figure out, bring back, repatriate all the bodies that were missing, all the MIA, bodies and whatever. He got to work, and if you read his autobiography, he has also his own crazy stories of how he found which bodies where and whatever. I ain't sure. But this group of bodies that was unidentified had a very concerned group of parents. Some of these soldiers who had died had parents who were very concerned that they should get their Kaver Yisrael. And they formed like a chevra, like similar today with the hostages, like a group of concerned parents. And they were really petitioning to have major forensics done. They wanted this group of soldiers to be identified so everyone can know who's who. Now, eventually they ended up by Rabbi Tzvi Pesach Frank, the Rav of Yerushalayim, ended up at his door, and they started petitioning him to figure out for us, Rabbi, figure out for us who these bodies are. We need help. We need to know who these bodies are. Who's who? Rabbi Tzvi Pesach tried his best, with the tools available to him. He was not able to come to a conclusion. Finally, he directs them to Rabbi Levine, who was a very famous person in Yerushalayim at the time, a very balipta person. He had been, the rabbi who went to visit the prisoners. He was the Aleph Institute before Aleph. He was a very believed person. They said, go to Rabbi Levine. He has, a different messiahs of Mahalchim how to do things. Go to him and he'll be able to help you. They go to Rabbi Levine. They say, "Rebbe Pesach sent us to you to figure out, who's who from these 12 bodies." And Rabbi Levine, he says, "No, I'm not interested. I can't help you with this." They nudge him. They push him. Finally, Rabbi Levine's masking. He's going to do a Gorel Hagra in order to figure out who these 12 bodies are, so they could put each kever, each person, each corpse in its proper kever, and everyone could reach kever Yisrael. Rabbi Levine, in his own handwriting, I believe, I have it here. I believe it's most of it's like done by a typewriter, but it's definitely signed in his hand, meaning like the page is it's like an old page from the 50s. It's signed by his hand, and he officially he's the one who had this entire page commissioned, and he writes as follows. He says he gathered together 12 people. How many people did? He did it with him, his son-in-law, Reb Aaron Yakubovich, and his son, Reb Rafael Binyamin Levine. And it's signed also by two parents from the parents' committee, Ruvain Mas and Yitzchak David Akayin Prisitz. I don't know if I'm pronouncing those names right, but those are parents from the the Lost and Found committee over here. And he writes, "We gathered in my attic in Mishkanot." He says where it is, the name of the building. He gathered there, and we opened up. We know even which chumash he used, which Tanakh he used. We opened up this Tanakh, and he says which psukim he said in the beginning to set the table. What the background psukim are. And then he says which psukim he found, and there's a list of 1 through 12, which psukim came up, and then which exact grave is which, the number, the markers, and based on this, they reburied all the 12 soldiers from this group of 35. This is factual information, meaning they're buried on Har Herzl in the IDF cemetery in Yerushalayim, I think, in Yerushalayim. And you could see, meaning the markers, and they're set up, and these are the names that are there. And this is probably the flagship story of a Gerl Hagra, because it has major real-world consequences, meaning they're doing something, an actual act. It happened very recently. It's documented by the practitioner, meaning by Rabbi Levine himself, who was creating this Gerl Hagra. So I would say this is like a flagship story of Gerl Hagra. So now Lamaisa. Lamaisa, we don't exactly. We don't really know. If you don't want to take it, you don't have to take it. Meaning because we don't know for real if these 12 bodies were actually, and the story, the theme with all Gerl Hagras and all of these type of predictive measures is always the same, because you never know. It's all the what ifs. You never know what happened on the other side of it. Meaning, right? If a guy made a Gerl Hagra, should he go to Vilna or Riga? You don't know that he wouldn't have survived. Just because he survived in Vilna doesn't mean he wouldn't have survived in Riga, etc., etc. Meaning, but that's neither here nor there. Akapanim, this is like a flagship story. So I want to talk a little bit about the whole Indian of Gorel, if Gorel's permitted, if Gorel's not permitted, when Gorel's permitted, how Gorel's permitted. Now, I just want to start with this, I guess, for shock value. I want to alert you to the fact that the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Kuf Ayin Tes, in Sif Aleph, I want to read you the words of the Shulchan Aruch. Shulchan Aruch says as follows. It's the first Sif, the Sif Kuf Ayin Tes is Shlo B'chashiv L'Einin U'Lenachish. It's not to do all these predictive type of magics and etc. It's the siman that's about Tamim Tiyeh She'im Hashem Lekecha, being, a yid being with tmimus and not trying to predict things. As I state in Shulchan Aruch, here's the first sif. Ein shayelim b'chayzim b'kechavim. You're not allowed to ask b'chayzim b'kechavim, meaning for information. V'loi b'geirelis. Mishum shenemar, says the Ramah, Hagam Mishum shenemar Tamim Tiyeh Hashem Lekecha. It's a Beis Yosef b'shem Tosfos. Kol shekin the asalishal b'kaismim v'nachshim v'chashmim. That's the entire sif. So geirelis is in there, square in the middle. You're not allowed to ask for information through a geirel. There's no chaylik. The Ramah and the Mechaber both agree. The Mechaber provides the din. The Ramah provides the source. So it's a straightforward din in Shulchan Aruch. There has no chaylik to this din, and it says you're not allowed to be shayl b'geirelis. So now forget about the geirel hagra. Forget about if these stories are true, if they really happened. If they didn't, forget about all that. The Torah is full of geirelis. Chazal are full of geirelis. Eretz Yisrael was given with a geirel. Achan was killed with a geirel. And many, many more. In the Beis Hamikdash, the payasis were done with geirelis, right? The way they divvied up all the malachas HaKadosh in the Beis Hamikdash was geirelis. So clearly, when we say you're not allowed to ask geirelis, it's not as straightforward as it seems. Clearly, even though the din in Shulchan Aruch says v'lei b'geirelis, you're not allowed to ask a geirel, it doesn't mean straight out the gate. You're not allowed to ask a geirel in any circumstance ever. So let's try to figure out when is it yem mutter, when is it not mutter, and the parameters a little bit. So now, as follows: Eretz Yisrael Malavesin, the Psukim tell us Begeirel Yichalik. Eretz Yisrael is going to be divvied up with a Geirel, and the Psukim in Yeshua go through it in much more detail. The Geirelis that were done. Now, Chazal and Baba Basra, the Gemara Baba Basra in Yeshneichel tells us that even though the pasuk says that B'Gairul Yichalik and Eretz Yisrael was given with the Gairul, it's not as mamash what meets the eye. The Gemara in Babas and Kuf Chav Beis says Eretz Yisrael was given B'Gairul, but then the Gemara says, but Eretz Yisrael was also given B'Orim V'Tomim. It was given with Ruach HaKodesh and Orim V'Tomim, with Yeshua and Eliezer HaKoyin wearing the Orim V'Tomim, figuring out exactly what's supposed to go to who. So the Gemara says, it was some sort of amalgamation, and the Gemara brings like the whole procedure of how they divvied up with the Gairul and the Orim V'Tomim. So clearly, that type of Gairul that was done with Yeshua and the Orim V'Tomim is not the same as any girl else that we're talking about. That was done Al Pi Ruach HaKodesh, very straightforward. Hashem was the one. It was Hashem's direct instruction to do it with the Gairul. Hashem's direct intervention through the Orim V'Tomim and Ruach HaKodesh. So it's much more direct of I don't know, call it closer to a nevuah than a Gairul. Now, Yeshua also uses the Gairul to kill Achan. Now, Achan is a person who violates the Chayrim. Yeshua, during the early battles to capture Eretz Yisrael, makes a Chayrim on sharing from the spoils of war. Achan violates the Chayrim. Klal Yisrael pays the price. Many, many Jews are killed in the next battle. And Yeshua, through a Gairul, figures out who the violator of the Chayrim was and puts him to death. Now, the Psukim over there tell us that when Hashem tells Yeshua, Chati Yisrael, Hashem did, Klal Yisrael did Naver, and that's why they're being punished. Yeshua says, okay, so tell me who it is and I'll resolve it. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Kaviyachal tells him, Chidalter Anechi? I'm a snitch? You think I'm going to tell you? Go make a girl and you'll figure it out. And Yeshua makes a girl, and the Gemara in the Sanhedrin tells us Yeshua makes a girl and he figures out exactly who it is. Now, there's an interesting line in that Gemara. Achan tells Yeshua as follows. Achan says, Ata ve'elazar gedei hadar atam. You and Elazar HaKohen are the gedei hadar. And if I make a girl right now, between the two of your names, one of you is going to come up. So you're going to tell me now that it proves something? Like a girl proves something? Now, what Achan is trying to say is that a girl is a faulty mechanism to establish anything. A girl, big deal, it can't be a girl, who cares? And Yeshua tells him, and this is the Gemara tonight, says, Yeshua tells him, please Achan, who's about to be put to death, don't be matal daifi in the girl. Don't be matal daifi in the girl. We're going to do girl is going to be very consequential. We're going to give out the whole Eretz Yisrael with the girl. Please, don't be matal daifi in the girl. This is what Yeshua tells Achan. So it's like an interesting conversation. You see Achan himself calling to attention the fact that a girl is not ironclad. A girl is, somewhat open to interpretation. And Yeshua is telling him, no, this was, Achan, that this is Al Pi Ruach HaKodesh, and Hashem guided my hand to find you like this. You want to know if you can make a stink, you can make make people doubt it? Yeah, you could be able to do that. I'm begging you, don't do that. Don't do that, you're just going to ruin it for later down the road. So Yeshua's Geiralas are like different. They're Ruach HaKodesh inspired Geiralas. They're not the direct Geiralas. Now, there's other Geiralas that are Zichr Mutter. Is this
question is better than the Teretz?
Who? Achan's question.
Because over there you can have
12
Shvatim,
yeah.
Right? You can just put it on one girl. Achan, you didn't put 600,000.
So you have to look at the whole process. There's a whole procedure. There's a whole procedure, all guided clearly by Siyat Shema and Ruach HaKodesh. Now, another type of girl that's clearly mutter is the girl that people do amongst themselves, meaning ha'achim shechalku, right? Brothers have a shutvis that they want to split, shutv have a shutvis they want to split, or yarshim have a yerusha that they want to split up. These are Gemaras Mufurashis. The Gemara Mabasra extensively talks about this. And the Gemara says, if brothers made a girl to split up land, so as soon as one of them is zeichin it, the Gemara Mabasra Daf Kufav, as soon as one of them is zeichin it, zachul kulam. That it sounds like irrevocable. Once one person's zeichin the girl, it's irrevocable. That's a Gracie Yeshiva Shasugi that we're not going to get into now. There's the Rambam and the Rosh and the Ravid. There's a Kesef Mishnah, there's a Rav Chaim on it, what exactly the kinyan is that transpires with the girl, how that works. But Al Kapanim, putting aside the minutiae and the nitty-gritty of how that girl works and how those kinyanim work, it's clear that the kinyan it's clear that the girl of splitting up things works. Other places we find girl that clearly works is, let's say, Inyanim Shekadusha, the Magen Avraham brings down, this is Al Kapanim, the old minig, before there was such a thing as Kaddish choirs, where you could have 10 people saying Kaddish Momis Medrash. It used to be everyone would split up. You had a Kaddish, you had to have a schos in the shul, and you'd get, one Kaddish davening or two Kaddishim, however it would work. Now the Magen Avraham brings down that if you have a Shaila, two Chiyuvim that are of equal value or of equal, claim to the Kaddish, how do you split it up? Magen Avraham says make a Geirul. Because a Geirul is a good way to decide. Now, again, that's more of a Geirul, not deciding who really deserves it. The Geirul is not being Machriya, that Pliny really deserves to say Kaddish more than Almighty. The Geirul is just being Machriya, that in this shul today, Pliny is going to say Kaddish and Almighty is not. It's not really telling you anything about him. So that type of Geirul Zichr also is clear in the Paiskim. That's permissible, that works, that's not a problem. What do you say? By the Leviim, exactly. Everyone has an equal claim. Payasis, Kehanim. Really. Oh, I hear. Yeah, that also. But I'm saying that's the same as the Gemara in Yuma with Payasis, that Kehanim, everyone has an equal claim to this work. They're allowed to. So we're narrowing down the Geirul that's being discussed that the Shulchan Aruch is trying to ban and outlaw is a Geirul about establishing future. It's a Geirul of what's going to happen in the future. or what you want to know, X, Y, or Z. You make a Geiral with the two options, and you choose one of them. So now, seemingly, the Geiral Hagra is like squarely in the crosshairs of the Geiral that should be not allowed. Meaning, we're seeing all the various chazals and where Geiral pops up in halacha, and it's only in these other circumstances where it seems to be mutter. The Geiral Hagra, as it's described, or as it seems to be employed, seems to be like it should be squarely in the crosshairs of where the Geirals that are Asr are. Now, there are definitely from Unzer Gedalim who never said it was Asr, the Geiral Hagra, but strongly dissuaded and discouraged people from engaging in Geirals, including and very, very focused on the Geiral Hagra. The Chazon Ish and the Stipler and Rav Shach, each one in their own language, and none of them actually saying it's Asr or it's not real. That's not what they were saying. But each one in their own way, they said you have to be very special for it to work. You have to have a particular Messiah to know how it works. It's not for our time. There's different verbiage that's used in each one of these different, the Archas Rabbeinu brings down a few different quotes from the Chazon Ish, from the Stipler. Rav Shach has in different places brought B'Shmai. So there was definitely people who frowned upon its usage, even including up to this level. Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, he should have refuah shalema, in his Tshuva Tamim Tiyah and in his Sefer Tamim Tiyah and in his Tshuva Vayashav Yam in Chelik Aleph, he writes that he doesn't believe all of he goes through like a whole like overview of Geiralis as they were used. He shows all the various Geiralis throughout the Torah, the various Geiralis throughout Halacha, a more thorough version of what we just did over here, and shows the ones that are permitted. And then he says Geiralis to predict the future are not allowed. That's what's being referred to in the Shulchan Aruch. He says it really comes from the Sifri. The Sifri says Tamim Tiyah Hashem Lekecha. The Sifri darshins Ein Mishtamshim B'Geiralis. You know how to do a Geiral. As I like the Sifri. So says Rabbi Yaakov Hillel, he doesn't believe all of these. I want to get his quote exactly right. But he says, "V'kushta amina, the lemes kafina." I'll tell you the truth, and I'm not afraid. He says, "She'elu asifrei geiralos shenifritzu b'yameinu b'rosh kol chutzos." All these svarim with geiralos that are popular today. Umiyachses oisem l'gdelik hadminenu, and the miyuchas to various gedalim from previous days. Einam barei samcha. They're not to be relied on. Kasher ein habaki yavchen. Just like a good eye could tell. By and large, they're copies of different Geirelos that were taken from the Goyim. Fine, he brings a quote that this is so. He says that fine, one second, Cain. Im Cain la'ar kol ha'amor she'eshtamsh specific Geirelos elu b'chlal ha'aser shekasab maran zal. It says, according to what I'm coming out, being mishtamish in all these Geiralos. Now, he's not particularly talking about the Geiral Hagra over here. He's talking about, you could go to a Sefer that has a lot of Kabbalah Svarim, and you could buy many Geiral Svarim that are miyuchas to this Rishon, to this Gain, to this unknown source. You can buy Geiral Svarim. There's even a Geiral Sefer. It's a little different. Whatever. You could buy Geiral Svarim, different Seder HaGeirelos that a person could engage in. And he's talking about all those Svarim. Now, the Geiral Hagra doesn't talk about specifically, but he's being matal daifi that not every story you hear you should believe, not every Messiah that they say is a Messiah is really a Messiah, and every Sefer that comes from so-and-so doesn't really come from him. And Mela, these Geirelos that seem, meaning if it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, it feels like it should be included in the Mechaber's Isser of what a Geirel is, then you're probably right, that this should be included in Yeni Surim. Now, but Lamaisa, there's literally dozens of stories of the Geirel HaGra being employed by many of the greatest Gedalim. So even though in the Haint Gedar, there's many who stayed away from them, but there is dozens of stories. So what's the carve out? What's the exception that allows for Geiral Hagra? So now there's a shach in Kufayin Tes in Sifkat and Hay, Afanot over there, not on the Sifra. The Mechaber says not to use girls, but the shach where he talks about the whole Tamim Tiyah. In the end, he throws in one line. He says let me get it right for you. The shach in one line over there, he throws in a word. He says as follows. Here, the Shach says, he says, really the Shach and the Taz both say it, but the Shach says, here it is, Mashma das Rava Paiskim, Afilu lasis Maisa, V'lismech alav la'asid al pasik, Mutter d'chashav k'tzas nevuah. If you want to be semich, even to do a Maisa, on words that you heard that come from a pasik, a Geirel that comes from a pasik, then that's allowed. Because that's k'tzas nevuah, that's what the Shach says. Now, what's he referring to? He's referring to something we know from several stories throughout Shas. There's 2 or 3 of them. The Medrash has more of them. Where various Amiram or Tanaim would want to know a certain bit of information, and they would stop a child and they would say, "Psaikli psukach, tell me your pasuk. Tell me what pasuk you're in the middle of learning, and based on how the pasuk would come out, they would be able to learn from there some sort of actionable information on how they should behave. So the Shach is referring to that, and the Shach says something that comes from Pseikli Psukach. If you say, I want to take out of a pasuk, then that's Me'ein Nevuah that you're allowed to do. Now, the Gorel HaGra, which we don't know, at least I don't know in particular what the exact correct way to do it is basically you take a Chumash, you open it up to a place, you skip seven pages, 7 amudim, 7 lines, 7 words, and then whatever you end up there at the end of all the 7s is the basic Gorel HaGra. Now, I might have, there's more details. If I would do it, it wouldn't work, because I don't know it exactly perfectly. But the Gorel HaGra is a version of Pseikli Psukech. It's a version of opening up a Chumash or a Navi and trying to get a Pseikli Psukech like the Shach. Meaning the Gorel HaGra is not saying, make a Gorel, put options in the bucket and choose the option out of the bucket, and that's the option that wins. The Gorel HaGra is a version of Pseikli Psukech. It's a version of like Hafachba v'Hafachba the Kulaba. Now, there's many Makaris to point to for this. I'll just, the Gemara in Moed Katan says, for example, the Gemara in Tainus in Daftas says, Leka milsa deksivi I forgot the exact word, but in Nevi'im Uksuvim, le remiza ba'iraisa. There's nothing that's written in the Nevi'im Uksuvim that's not Ramaz in the Torah. And the Gemara goes to bring a few examples of things that are written in Nevi'im Uksuvim and the Ramaz that's in the Torah. Now, Nevi'im Uksuvim, a lot of it is things that happened, right? Meaning it's world events. It's things that happened that transpired over periods of hundreds and hundreds of years. And the Gemara is clearly telling us, Leka remili le remiza ba'iraisa, meaning a properly attuned eye could look at the psukim and find where the stories that are going to happen 1,000 years later, 1,500 years later, are Ramos in the Torah. Right? That's Chazal themselves. Mamish and the Gemara and Tainus is saying this. We have, everybody knows this, the say that Darius brings it down, the Shem HaGedolim brings it down, the Ramban had a Talmud, Rav Avner, we don't know exactly who he was, who went off the derech, and later in life the Ramban met him, and the Ramban asked him, what happened to you? You were good in learning, what happened to you? Why did you go off the derech? And the Talmud of Avner told the Ramban, I once heard you in Parashat Azinu say a drasha, and you said everything about every person is ramos in this parasha. And I said, come on, that's foolish. It's impossible that in Azinu, one little parasha, everybody's name, everything. Come on, it's foolishness. And I said, come on, this is silly, and I left. Ramban says, that's why you left. You should have just asked me. And he says, yeah, where's my name, Ramaz? And the Ramban told him, Amarti Ashbis me Enish. What's the pasuk? Amarti. Exactly. So, and the Seifei Tevis of those words is Avner. Haman says, you see, your name is Musker in this parsha. Now, there's many different versions of this, but Akapanim, the idea of Lekamilu Remizi Beiraisa, and therefore a person could be shayil by a pasuk, like the Shach says, that's the carve out that the Gorel HaGra is built upon. The Gorel HaGra is built upon like a modern update of the Pseikli Psukach, of the Lekamilu Remizi Beiraisa, of like being able to look at a pasuk and take out from there, some sort of pertinent information. Now, there's much. What do you say? Should only include the Torah. I hear it's rather machlokes. It's supposed to be just a chumash or a tanakh. That's what I said. If I did it, it wouldn't work. You have to have the exact mechanics to get it right. I don't have the proper Masera, but there's a machlokes. It should be a tanakh or a chumash. It has to be chumash with 2 columns. Also, our chumash will not publish like that anymore. Like a chumash with 2 columns, no mafarshim. Like 2 columns. There's a lot of details. After class, we could do. Yeah, there's a lot of details. But I just want to share one more nakuda. I think we'll wrap up with this. In regards to using Gorel, just how high the stakes could be, there's a famous, we know, Yaina HaNavi was put on the boat, right? This is the Navi. Yaina HaNavi was put on the boat, and there was a stormy seas, and they made a Gorel, and they threw him off into the water, Yaina gets swallowed, etc., right? Now, what about today? If you're on a boat trip with your friends, and it's extremely stormy seas, and the captain tells you that the way to survive would be to throw off 2-3 of the people, could you make a Gorel, the same thing, and say, listen, this is how it is. Someone's got to go. Why should everybody die b'chinam? Let at least 2-3 people go, and everyone's going to be saved. Could you do that today? Is that a halacha? Is that something that's... So now, spoiler alert, there's no sim in the Shulchan Aruch that says one way or the other. There's no Rambam about it. But there is a Sefer Chassidim. The Sefer Chassidim actually has a stira. Sefer Chassidim in one place says that someone people are traveling on a boat, and it's very stormy, and it becomes clear that if they throw off one of them, then all of them could survive. They could make a Gorel, and they should repeat the Gorel 3 times in a row. And if you repeat the Gorel 3 times in a row, and it always falls out on the same person, then they could get rid of that guy, throw him into the water, and then everyone else will survive. As I like the Sefer Chassidim. Now, elsewhere in the Sefer Chassidim says that people say that you can make a Gorel, if people are on a boat and you need to off one of them to save them, not true, not allowed, you're not allowed to. So it's not much like a steer in the Sefer Chassidim. Now all the Achronim explain this in their own way. I just want to highlight the stakes. If we're going to say that Gurel could be trusted lahalacha and that you're allowed to employ a Gurel, so the stakes could be very high. And rather the Shulchan Aruch, the Shulchan Aruch does talk about this, and it says you can't be semach in it. The Shulchan Aruch says that if an attacking army came to a town and they surrounded it, and they said, Tnu lanu shechet from the town, you're not allowed to give them that person. You're not allowed to make a girl. Give us one person. You're not allowed to make a girl and give one person, any one person. You're all equally in danger over here. And if you all have to die because you're not allowed to kill someone else, you all have to die because you're not allowed to kill someone else. It's your Vayavar. As I pass in Shulchan Aruch, it's 2 Simanim later in Simon Kufayin Test. So really the Shulchan Aruch does address the Sefer Chassidim Shaila and says you're not allowed to do it. Now, the Afanor, the Pesach Tshuva brings down, there's a Tefillah L'Moshe, who says that L'Maisa, according to the Sefer Chassidim, according to the Geiralis, maybe you can make a girl, and you could, that would be a way to figure it out. The Pesach Tshuva does bring that down, and the Chazon Ish, in I forgot where exactly, strongly argues and says you can't be Samech on that Tefillah L'Moshe in no way. But Akban and the Achronim explain something interesting, and again, I don't know if this is Halach L'Maisa, but the Achronim say that the Yishuv in the Sefer Chassidim is as follows. If you look at the words of the Sefer Chassidim, in one place says, you're traveling, and there's a storm that comes, and you're traveling through the storm, and you want to throw one person off, you're not allowed to. If you look in the other place, where the Sefer Chassidim permits it, the Sefer Chassidim says, you're traveling, and a storm attacks your boat. Meaning the way that he frames it is much more like Yona's story exactly. It's you're looking out the window, everybody else is b'shalom, everyone else is traveling smoothly, and your boat is being attacked. He says, then if you make several geiralis and you prove who it is, then you can get rid of him. That attack is like a mirror of how the Pirkei D'Blazah describes Yona's story, how they did it a bunch of times, they hung him over. We know this, everyone knows this from when they're kids. They dipped his feet in the water and the water stopped. They pulled him back, it started again, they dipped his feet again, right? I mean, they did this whole, to prove that it was really him who's the cause of the issue, and only then they would do it. So that's like the issue of the Sefer Chassidim. Okay, in any case, to be continued in a few weeks, to Mitzvah Shem.
Girl or girl now.
Yeah.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.